Welcome to Banking on Community, a podcast that explores how community banks thrive with the leaders who run them. I'm your host, Deb Barnes, a banking strategist and AI advisor with 18 years in banking and financial services. I help banks transform through data, analytics, and automation. I want to welcome our guest, Royce Ngiam. He's the Chief Marketing Officer at First City Credit Union. He has 28 years in banking, with much of that in the credit union space. And you'll find out today that he's all about having the right next conversation with his credit union members.
Hi, Deb. Thanks for having me on, and definitely a pleasure. So, quickly about myself, I've been with a credit union or in the credit union space for about 20 years. I've been in the banking space for almost 28. So, I've been around the block quite a few times, I think. And so, I know we're going to get into industry trends, but even just thinking about the last 25, 28 years, just how much the landscape itself has changed. My current role is I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for First City Credit Union in Altadena, California. We're recording this in May of 25. If anybody recognizes Altadena, we shot to fame, unfortunately, because of the Eaton fires earlier this year. And so with that, it was one of the most, I think it's the second most devastating fire in California history. And that sort of put Altadena a little bit in the spotlight. It happened the same time as the Palisades fire in January. Uh, been here about a year and a half, like I said, not new to the credit union space. Prior with multiple credit unions before in marketing and business development, and then also a huge industry advocate. So I recently termed off of America's Credit Union, formerly CUNA, the trade organization, as chair of their marketing and business development council. So just very fortunate to work with credit unions all across the country and just learn their stories, meet some amazing people, and just thought share, which is one of the unique things that I love about the credit union space is we knowledge share all the time. So whether it's across the country or it's across the street, we don't have any problem getting with each other and talking about what works, what doesn't work, things that we don't understand, things that they might understand, and then really coming together for advocacy work and really making a difference for our communities.
That's awesome. What a great history and great service to the credit union community as well. So can you tell me a little bit about the bank itself? How big is it? How many, members do you have and what your growth looks like?
Yeah, of course. So we are right around $900 million in assets. So we're looking at that $1 billion mark. We've been around for 87 years. I think like as most credit unions or thrifts, we started in the Great Depression. We have about 56,000 members and we serve LA County departments and agencies. So think social services, child and family services, LA General Medical Center. We also have the LA County, which is the largest law enforcement agency in the nation. So we're very much, not only are we mission driven, we are very civic minded, and our members are the working heroes that keep LA County of 10 million residents just moving every day. So we're truly Angelinos helping Angelinos, and that's what we lean into.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then, I know LA is still growing, so I imagine your growth targets are also growing. What does your growth plan look like in the next couple of years?
So our growth plan is to grow, not for the
Keep
sake
going,
of
right?
Yeah, well, ironically, because it's all public data, our credit union had been shrinking over the last 5 years or so, and I think there's a multitude of factors. Quite frankly, I wasn't here, so I don't have the inside skinny on it. But if we just look at the credit union over the last 5 years, we've been shrinking membership, and I'm happy to say that last year we actually closed net positive, and this year we're absolutely growing. And we're not growing for the sake of growth. I know people, that's like a nice little buzz line, and people say that, but really, we're trying to grow in the right ways. And for us, the right ways is to continue to reach out to those LA County employees. We know their unique needs, we know their unique schedules, and all of the ones I've met, we talked about it briefly, Deb. They're as mission driven as we are. When you're in civil service, you're not in it for the titles, you're not in it for the money. You're really in it because you're giving back to the community and their clients, the ones that they work with. They need the services that the county offers. And so for us, I mean, that's right in line with what we do. And so we want to grow as they grow. We want to be there throughout their journeys. First day at orientation, whether they're a brand new cadet as they go through their journey as a deputy, or if they're coming into a hospital, or even their first days, through the county offices proper. We want to be there with them every point of their professional journey, which as much as we want to separate and we talk about your personal journey, your professional journey, it all intermingles and we want to be there for every point of their lives.
Oh wow, that's a great story. And remind me, does the credit union? What are the kind of key products? Do you offer both customer products, business products? What is the suite that you offer?
Currently, we are 100% consumer focused. So a little unpopular against credit union people, but yeah, we offer all the same products as a bank on the consumer side. So checking, savings, mortgage loans, credit cards, auto loans. What I like to say is at the end of the day, and again, not very popular in our space, but it's a commodity product. Let's be frank, whether you get a mortgage loan from me or anyone else, it is such a highly regulated industry that there's very little differentiation in the product. What's different is how we make the loans and why we make the loans. And we're only going to make the loans that make sense for our members. We're not out there for the incentives, we're not out there for the commissions. We are all about making sure that it is the right product or service for the member. And if it benefits us and it doesn't benefit them, we're not going to do it. We're only going to do the things that help our members grow. One of our core tenets is financial advice and advocacy to develop financial wellness. And so we spend a lot of time with financial wellness classes. We help on credit building, debt management strategies, just something as simple as understanding basic credit. So we're not going to go out there and lead with rate specials, or we don't have the coolest new technology out there. But what we do is we invest in making sure our members understand their financial well-being and how they can focus on that and how that improves their quality of life.
That's fantastic. Thanks for giving us that insight. Okay, so we'll shift a little bit into industry trends. So I just love to hear from you. What's the big wave everyone in banking and credit union seems to be trying to ride right now? What's your perspective?
Well, so I mean, it's a little cliche. So it's all going to be in the digital space, and there's a lot to unpack there. AI is one. Whether we are love it or hate it or fearful of it, sci-fi fan. So everything I've learned about
Terminator 2,
AI,
you know?
there's no good. Yeah, yeah, it all ends up coming up to no good. But it's out of Pandora's box. The genie's loose from the bottle, whatever the saying is. So it's out there. So what's the promise of AI? The reality is nobody knows. But for me, it always equates to like the gold rush, where nobody got rich mining gold, but they got rich selling shovels. And so when I think about the AI space, I'm thinking chip manufacturers, I'm thinking AI investments, I'm thinking infrastructure, because I think the reality is there's very little business or consumer promise yet in terms of the application and the systematizing of it. It's coming. I do believe it is coming, but it's such in the nascent phases that everybody, unfortunately, I think we look to the industry or to others to innovate or for answers. I mean, we're taught in school that there's a right answer, but we're absolutely in a phase of writing the playbook or laying the track. And so the mindset here has to be the people that are willing to bang rocks together and shape that future. And there's enough of them out there, but I don't know how many there are because that's not culturally what we've been bred to do, I believe. And so I think that the challenge or the trend is to find the thought leaders, the ones that are out there. They're out there, the ones that are going to help us shape what that looks like. And then the ones, frankly, that are brave enough to risk bringing some of that to market and trusting in some of this technology. So I think that's one of the biggest trends. The second trend is it's been a long time coming, but it's just digitization. We've been, like I said, I've been in this business almost 30 years. I grew up with ledger cards and I used to type out disclosures, and now everything has moved over to mobile phones. When living through some of the digital adoption from the early days, like online banking, I remember what we pretty much did was take offline processes and duplicate them in a digital world. not saying, hey, you've got a brand new platform. You don't have to do it in
The
that
way we
order. Yeah, but we did because, I think when email came out, somebody go back and fact check me or ask one of your favorite AIs. But I think when email first came out, it actually drove up the demand for paper because everybody started
people are
printing
printing off
off their
everything,
email. Yeah, thinking we don't have
printing
to do.
off their calendars and highlighting it.
That's right. Yeah, you remember.
Mhm.
So, and we're in that phase now where, if you want to join an average credit union or bank, and I know this is a podcast and I'm showing you my phone here, but you know, what's the member experience in joining your credit union or opening an account at your bank? Because the reality is we just copied a lot of offline processes and building that experience. And the reality is they want to join your bank like they want to join TikTok. And if it doesn't look like they're enrolling for TikTok, then people don't want it anymore. It's that simple. And so when we think about digital adoption and digital transformation, are we thinking about it through the institution lens or are we thinking about it through the experience standpoint? And then when we think about the experience standpoint, looking at some further data, the most interesting thing that hit me in the last year and a half or so, is when we look at Gen Z and Gen Alpha, for the first time, we have a multicultural youth demographic that is the majority. So prior to that, white ethnicity was the majority population. Now it's multicultural. And then now we've got multicultural youth. So when you've got that, again, are we developing products, services, and content that talks to a multicultural youth generation? And the answer is probably not. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there's some out there, but I think they're the exception. And really thinking about those three trends together, how do you reshape your business? Because we are very much a legacy business. And the risk of legacy business, I remember learning back in MBA school, 25, 30 odd years ago. And I think that, I don't know if this statistic is still true, but back, do the math, 25, 30 years ago, I learned in school that they said 100 of the largest companies at the turn of the century, of that 100, only two of them were still in existence, and neither one of them were doing what they did when they started. And when we think about transformation, our largest companies in the world are, you know, 20, 30 years old now, but we're not talking about historical industry behemoths and the industry leaders, the ones that are shaping our track. They're the new tech or innovative disruptors that are coming out. So how do
Mhm.
you take disruption in the legacy business and throw in consumer trends? And I think that's sort of the landscape we're living in,
Yeah,
which
it's giving you a complex landscape to operate in for sure.
which I love. The more complex, the harder it is, the more I like to do it. If it's easy, I don't want to do it. If it's hard and it's frustrating, I want to keep doing it until I suck less at it. I don't think I'll
Until
ever
you
be
get
good.
some progress, right? Just a little bit of forward motion can mean
That's
a
it.
lot.
That's the goal.
Yeah, it's an interesting intersection that you bring up too with the multicultural generation that's coming up. And the other side of that, and more on the small business side, is, the wave of boomers that are retiring and closing their businesses as well. And so,
Absolutely. And it's nostalgic because I'm seeing the headlines, 50 years in the city, closing. These are icons, these are cultural
yeah,
icons. And then even more worrisome to me when you think about that, Deb, is the knowledge transfer. Where's that all going? So when you've got people that have been in industry for 35, 40 years, literally shape the fabrics of cities through commerce, and they're retiring out, where's that knowledge going? Are we transferring it down? Are we learning those lessons? Do we understand what shaped us? And how do you capture that?
yeah, there's some real history there. And you may have just come up with a new favorite quote of mine that, shaping the fabric of commerce. I love that. That's so true. And small business is such a big part of that, right? The majority of jobs are in small businesses,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. So, well, you really hit those industry trends really well. Anything else before we move on to kind of talk more about internal, what's going on, and maybe how are you guys solving some of those trends?
Well, I mean, the other trend, it really just when we think about legislation and we think about regulation, and again, not commenting one way or the other on current state, with the exception of that there's a lot of uncertainty. And so when you are in regulated businesses and or regulation, frankly, it impacts everybody. But how do you navigate in uncertainty? In some of the strategy stuff that I build, one of my slides is always you can't plan for black swan events. And it feels like in the last 3 4 years, everything's been a black swan event. And you almost have to be planned for like a Black Mirror universe, and then you'll have a working business plan.
Yeah. If you can just imagine an alternate reality, you're going to be great,
And if you don't, then I mean, good luck to you. Survive with the rest of us.
right? That's interesting too, because I think that's another layer on consumer behavior as well. That uncertainty is playing out in terms of, buying homes and how much credit people are taking on or the costs that are going up. They need more credit to get by with the same. So that volatility, that uncertainty is also playing out, for the business side, but also for the consumer side of what their needs are.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, we're gonna need a mortgage to buy eggs at the current trends, I think. But to your point, that's what makes this stuff so fascinating to me. And I know you came from a data background. So now those that can thrive are the ones that can sift through the information and then be able to separate the chaff from the weed. What is meaningful and what is fad and then what is rhetoric. And once you can kind of sort through that, then you can get your personal life in order, and then you can get your professional strategies in order. But if you're out there, if you're just bobbing in the wind or letting the wind take you, you don't know where you end up. It's time to get a little bit away and get some under your own power a little bit, and then you can navigate it a little bit better. Never great, you can't control Mother Nature, but at least you can at least push yourself in the right direction.
That's right. Okay, so let's move to kind of current state, things going on at the credit union. What's the biggest challenge or constraint that you're facing right now?
Honestly, I think everybody's resource constrained, so there's got to be a better way to think about it. So maybe AI will help me think about it. But when you think about, you know, you'll always be limited in terms of time, in terms of people, in terms of money. But the geographies only get bigger. And then when you throw in the digital landscapes, there's some multiple then to what you have to accomplish. So then how do you frankly get smarter or better at being able to deliver on those promises? So what we talked about, with the consumer needs, the consumer demand, how do we meet them where they are? And so that's really the challenge is how do we take us as it evolves through regulation, through services, and then how do we get where the members want to be? How do we show up better in their wallets, in their digital wallets? How do we show up when they need us? And so building the organization or changing the organization to meet those needs. And that means investments in infrastructure. That means investments in cybersecurity. That means investment in people, whether it's upskilling and training or bringing in different talent. And so I think part of it is the business itself is transforming. Historically, you can have legacy bankers run a bank. And it's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey, that's the favorite scene and reference it all the time. And the core of our business is still the same. I don't have your money, it's in your house, Dad, or in your neighbor.
It's a great theme.
100% live that. But now the difference is you're no longer getting money through a bank run. You're doing it through digital devices. You're doing it through multiple devices. Now we're going to have wearables. We're going to have constant on. I'm a data junkie and I want a lot of data and I want a lot of connectivity. So how do we make sure we're there? Uh, Shopping carts so that when you make your online purchases, are we there when you're getting your paychecks? Is it there when you need it to be? Really, how do you bring it all together and continue to stay on the forefront of it? And knowing that the fraudsters are out there working even harder to try to part.
And they don't have to play by any rules or regulations because
No,
they're illegal criminals, they're just getting you.
well, in a lot of ways, they work harder than we do. They don't have bank holidays and they don't take weekends off.
That's true.
And so they're constantly thinking about how they're going to get your money or your information from us or from you. So how do you, I'll say defend against it, but how do you protect? in
Hmm.
that same way? Are we spending enough time thinking about that?
Yeah, it's that balance between the friction you have to create for the consumer and protecting them, right? It's like, well, I could protect you less and have less friction, and your life's going to be easier, and you're not going to get a fraud alert. Like, are you sure you want to spend that on an appropriate transaction?
Right.
Or I can miss that one, right? And you're going to have an event. So that's a challenging dynamic.
Absolutely. So now building the structures and building the systems or partnering to get those systems, I think those are the challenges that we face in terms of just making sure that we are a modern or forward facing company.
Hmm. Yeah. So what have you tried already that worked or didn't work on those fronts?
Frankly, those guys, they're too much into depth on that for me. But what I'll tell you from the marketing side, what we're looking at is we're looking at cloud storage for analytics platforms. And that way we can have automated and more real time action. So building marketing automation, tying it into data clouds, keeping that safe and secure. So we anonymize a lot of the data there. And that way, if the cloud does get compromised, there isn't really anything in there that's worth taking. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of different levels of security that we take, and then building in the automation so then we can try to meet members where they are when they need us. Exploring just different options for uh, another probably a buzzword, hyper personalization. I know that gets used a lot, but I really do believe I'm not take credit for it. I heard it somewhere else, but the I think one of the promises of AI is really personalized advertising. We can truly get to the one-to-one advertising. So no more is Deb in a segment, but it is a
Hmm.
segment of Deb. And that way we can talk to you maybe a little differently. And talk to you doesn't mean, one of the things that I talk about as a banker, we talk about next best cross sell or next best product, because that's all they're thinking about. And I think that's absolutely wrong. I think it's all about the next best conversation. And I'm looking to AI and analytics to help me with that. Because the next best conversation might be, Deb, you need to join my credit union, not Deb, I need to sell you a credit card. And so when we think about the business first versus the member first, that's where you miss. So we're making a lot of movement and investment that way. Those are really the two big things. And then really just thinking about the digital strategy and making sure that the experience does match. And I'm only slightly joking about the joining via TikTok versus a traditional sense, because as those generations get younger, they need to have native platforms. But we're not building native applications. And so that's what we've got to start thinking about. And so we're looking at partnering in that space as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, one more question on kind of the current state, and then we'll move to a more futuristic outlook. What's been harder than it should be lately? Who's feeling pain? Is it your staff, your customers, your leadership team? What's been harder than it should be?
What's been harder than it should be? I think it's one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to spearhead, we call it voice of the member. So twice a month we get all the leaders in a room and we say, check your title and check your functional area at the door. One of the things I've always been fascinated with are like teaching hospital shows. Yeah, just like medical shows. I'm squeamish, but I like the concept. And when something goes wrong, they have like these rounds and they have to defend why a patient didn't make it. And so using that model, that's what we do with Voice of the Member. So we get everybody in a room and we say, look, in the last 2 weeks, these were the friction points. These are the complaints. It might be a negative Google review. It might be a negative NPS review. It might be a bad experience. These are all the member friction points. What went wrong? And we've simplified it into three things. It's either people, process, or technology. And we typically think it's people, but very rarely is it people. Sometimes we think most often we also think it's technology, and very rarely is it truly the technology. And a lot of times it's process. And so I think the hardest thing, long winded answer, is how do you first identify the root cause of issues? And then how do you systematically fix it? And that seems to be harder than it is, because we either typically, and again, it's not unique to us because I've been around the block and I work with a lot of institutions, we tend to go for the fix and we usually never go for the cure.
Hmm.
And so when you can get to what really is the cause and separate the symptom from the problem, then you can really start to fix it or cure it. Unfortunately, getting to that is oftentimes the most difficult thing.
Yeah, I think your story earlier too about when we first had digital banking experiences, we just took what we did offline and put it online. And we didn't think about if that process is still right or not, right? And so to
That's
your point
it.
now, it's like, well, it might not be working, but it's not the technology and it's not the people, it's the process we had in the first place, right? We didn't save new information that would have been useful, or we didn't or adapt what we were doing to where we were doing it, right? So
Exact absolutely.
I totally relate to that notion and that focus on process. And man, getting to the root cause is always harder than you think. It's always a little
Yeah,
harder than
but
you
we don't
think.
spend time on it. But when you do, once you fix it, then you're gonna see your NPS scores change. Then you're gonna see members join. That is what we don't spend enough time on. We always want the fun stuff. I'm a marketing guy, and so everybody wants like the coolest campaign or the best ad or let's get out there. And but that's not what helps you sustain in the long run.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's shift a little future focus for a second. What's your top priority? What's on your list for this quarter or this year?
Top priority is integrating the marketing automation with the marketing analytics and really start to understand member journeys better and start to understand where we should intersect with members when they want it and really figuring out thinking about that next best conversation. So instead of trying to cross sell product or instead of trying to quote unquote deepen relationship because people don't like it's a euphemism for selling more product because people don't like to think about selling. It's really thinking about that next best conversation because sometimes again also a little cliche but selling isn't necessarily a bad thing if you literally have the best checking account on the planet or the best credit card on the planet and it saves your member or your customer money and you're afraid to bring it up because you feel like you're selling, you're doing them a disservice. I do believe that. I mean, why let them get gouged or why have them pay more somewhere else if you truly believe you have the best product? So it's not always a bad thing, but really thinking about, but what is that next best conversation? What is it that Deb or Deb's neighbor or Deb's colleague, what is it that they really need from us? And then how do we get it to them? That's really what we're thinking about, and that's what we're really building to.
Yeah, that's great. And it is very hard. One of the things that I learned recently was that the average age of a first-time home buyer is increasing. So people are waiting longer. Affordability is part of that. The economic uncertainty we talked about earlier. But so maybe one of those next best conversation is just like, hey, you're in your mid 20s. Let's start thinking about that.
That's
What's your
right.
credit look like? Right. So I'm not trying to sell you a mortgage today, but I know that you're going to be there in the next couple of years. And let's not have that be your starting point. Things like that I think are great opportunities.
Absolutely. One of the biggest eye openers for me years ago is we were doing some work with the youth group, professional youth group, and we were thinking about financial education topics. And I'm thinking they wanted to talk about student loans and auto buying. And instead, the topics that came back once we did the surveys, they wanted to know about retirement planning and home buying. And I'm like, I wasn't thinking about that when I was, in my mid starting a professional job. The last thing I was thinking about, well, what kind of car could I buy?
What kind of car am I going to get? Yeah.
Yeah, now they're like coming in thinking about retirement and we got to buy a house. I'm like, who are you?
You guys are great. This is fantastic. The world has a chance. Thinking about retirement in your mid 20s. Good job.
Oh,
Fantastic. Okay, so you talked about that's your number one priority. What's standing in the way of hitting those goals? Any blockers that are keeping you from making the progress you need?
yeah. Again, those blockers come back to time and resources.
Yeah.
You've got competing priorities, you have day-to-day responsibilities. My day-to-day is never the same. Yesterday morning I was out somewhere at 6 a.m. for an event and you know, sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you're not. So how do you and even with the teams, everybody's scattered and there's so many conflicting priorities. I know I just said that, but it's a little bit hard to focus on the future state when you're living in that present state. And so how do you create the space where you can accommodate doing both? That I haven't figured out yet. And it's either run faster, it's either get smarter, it's either work longer. Yeah. I don't know what that answer is. Maybe that's the challenge, is I'm not
That's the
smart enough to
challenge.
figure it out.
Yeah. So true. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up. I'd love to kind of end on two thoughts. One, why do you love what you do? And then any final thoughts that you want to add to that.
I love what I do because it's fun. You know, I'm not showing up. The work that we do for all the credit unions that I've been and the credit unions that I talk to, we're not out there. We're not driven by EPS. We don't have a stock price. Most of us, there's not a way to create like crazy executive stock bonus programs. We're not motivated by money. We're not motivated by business metrics. We're motivated by doing good and giving back. And how do we give back in the coolest ways possible? And that's what drives me. And sometimes, and that's also why I do so much in the industry, because not because I know more than most, but because I like being with like-minded people. And so when you get, I don't know who to attribute it to, but the IQ of the group is greater than the IQ of the individual. When you get so many like-minded people knowledge sharing, then the impact that you can make is incredible. And so that's what I love. That's what drives me, is our work that we do on a daily basis. It changes um, the well-being for so many, for our membership, to those that aren't even members yet. And if our members are happy, then imagine the service that they're giving back into the community that they're serving. If they're not worried about their finances, if they're not worried about debt, if they're not worried about, living paycheck to paycheck, what kind of service can they give back? So it all pays forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Banking on Community podcast. It was a great chat. I definitely learned a lot and had a lot of fun. And hopefully, we'll see each other again soon.
Absolutely. Definitely my pleasure, Deb. It was a privilege to be here.